Okay, so I'm recording. And again, what we're doing here is trying to make sense of how far is too far when it comes to the law getting involved. Okay, you have rights, but you cannot do whatever you want whenever you want. So we know that our 4 fundamental freedoms are, to summarize, expression, religion, conscience and religion, peaceful assembly, and association. We've already defined what those are. Let's play what you can't do. And this is also where you can challenge yourself, because you might have an idea, and we talked about this a little bit last week when we were looking at chapel as well. When we look at the issue of, racism, racism in the mind, so to speak, isn't illegal. Like, there's nothing you can do about prejudice that exists inside of the mind. And it may actually surprise you that, for someone to make a racist or sexist comment, depending on the circumstances, there might not actually be all that much that the courts or the law can do about it, because of certain, rights that we have in order to, express ourselves. There are, of course, lots of exceptions. And again, we're not lawyers here, but we'll try to unpack this. When might be, and you can go in any order you like here, what might be an example where it could be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society for the government to come in and say, sorry, this interpretation of this right is not protected. We're going to say, no, we're going to limit your right to say you can't do this. So I'm checking the chat here. So I see someone saying, yeah, we can build on this. The idea of making threats. Okay, well, let's expand on this. Which right here would we be saying you're taking too far in regards to making threats? Yeah, okay, so expression. You cannot use your freedom of expression to call up people and tell them you are going to hurt them. If I was going to call them up and be like, hey, by the way, I know where you live and I'm coming over to your house tonight. I'm going to murder you and your family while you sleep. Good night. That's not okay. It's not. You might be like, oh, well, like, hey, it's just words. We have to understand, if someone can make the legitimate claim that their safety and security, other rights that are protected under the charter, have been violated, then you can't justify your just words. And this is sometimes where the courts do get involved. You might go, oh, I was only joking. And there is a place to be said about people saying things and it not being able to hold up because it is just words. But yeah, if you can't, just go up to people and be like, the next time I see you, I'm going to pound your face in. And then, they just have to live with this constant fear. That's not okay. So, you are limited in your expression when it comes to causing, panic and fear. And a classic example that a Supreme Court justice in the United States said that even the most strict supporters of freedom of expression would say that it's not okay for you to go into like a crowded movie theater and, say that there's a fire and, try to cause panic. And sadly, the thing is, there are YouTubers and people out there who try, these, oh, it's just a prank, bro. It's just a prank, trying to get this critical acclaim. And, well, I wouldn't even say critical acclaim, just, popular. They're trying to get views, right, by behaving badly sometimes. Some of them actually do face criminal prosecution because you can't just interfere with people's safety and security and then use the justification that, oh, well, it's just pretend, so, no harm, no foul. I mentioned earlier, and I mean, he paid the ultimate price for it, but there was a YouTuber who was shot and killed because he was trying to film, and I kid you not, a robbery prank video in which they would accost people with butcher knives and then say, oh, it's just a prank. He wound up getting shot and died. So now you might say, well, Mr. Seidenberg, is that legal? Taking the law into your own hands? That becomes challenging too, because this happened in the United States and firearms laws are very, very different in Canada than the US. But this is a good start, right? You cannot use your freedom of expression, to call people up, threaten them, tell them you're going to hurt or injure them. That is not okay. So we're on a roll. What are some other examples of sorry, too far? The general rule, you have rights, but so do others. So you cannot use your rights to infringe upon the rights of others. That's kind of where it would, kind of cancel out. And I know grammatically speaking, and I've got commas all over the place. It's just kind of stream of consciousness here. So I'm not sure if this is just a comment or the government should only step in when action is taken to violate someone else's rights. Words don't kill people, but violent acts do. Again, I'm not sure what this is in regards to specifically, or if it's challenging what I said earlier. But, okay, but I would go back to what I said before. I can't use my freedom of expression to just call up strangers and threaten them and say I'm going to do terrible things to them. And then I don't actually move forward with it. So therefore, there's nothing that the courts can do. Like if we look at something like criminal harassment, like there does need to be a place where, no, it's not okay for you just to say things and like, well, I didn't back it up with actions. I know, but to then try to put someone into a perpetual state of fear for their safety because of direct claims that you have made, that's not okay. Now, I will also say this, we do want to be careful, and because sometimes the pendulum swings too far the other way, where people will then try to say, oh, well, because this person has a political view that is different than mine, I don't feel safe. And because I don't feel safe, then they should not be able to say what they think because that doesn't make me feel good. And I want to silence them. I would agree that that is not the place for the government to step in. That kind of censorship where, oh, that thought challenges my worldview, or I don't feel safe because I don't like what they have to say because it runs contrary to my thought process. You can't, or you shouldn't be able to use that as justification to silence people. And we will actually look at, the thing is though, universities are very interesting spaces. They are supposed to be places of freedom of thought, freedom of expression, challenging things. And we have found that oftentimes the opposite sometimes becomes true, where universities, maybe their intent is, trying to make people feel safe but the problem is they are doing it in a way that is actually contrary to what freedom of expression is actually all about. And there was a famous Canadian case, and we'll talk about, there was a woman by the name of Lindsay Shepherd, who, good for her that she was actually had her cell phone camera recording and, recorded the conversation where she was facing disciplinary action simply because she showed an episode of a show it's on TVO, TV Ontario. It was The Agenda with Steve Paikin, and it had the controversial figure Jordan Peterson in the clip. And just the fact that she had shown that was enough to, set off the alarm bells for some people, because again, and what we will unpack, sort of the mystique surrounding, freedom of expression and all that. So we're not done, but there are limits. So there we go. Let's tackle the other ones. What's an example? Maybe not like an exhaustive list, but what's an example of, okay, well, you can do this, but this is too far.
For like freedom of religion, you can't have like a cult that abuses like a certain group of people in the religion, in a sense. Like you can't have a cult, like a religion that's like women can't decide who they marry. They just get married off to whomever wants to marry them, in a sense.
Well, you bring up actually a very, very challenging issue surrounding that, because on the one hand, I agree with you that you're not allowed to violate the freedom that and rights that people have within a group. But it often becomes then a challenge of determining, are they there of their own free will or not? Because when we talk about, the issue of it being a cult, so to speak, on the one hand, you can say, well, you might not agree with the religious beliefs, but, you can't just say that, okay, well, this religion's, mainstream, so it's okay. This one's a cult, so it's not okay. You do bring up a good point that, and this is sometimes where investigations have to take place. Just because you have a particular set of religious beliefs are one thing. So we'll bring it to a head here. Beliefs are one thing, but then acting upon those beliefs are another thing entirely. And when we look into things even like polygamy, like the belief that being married to more than one person, and if we look at the law, it's not okay. And some people say, well, shouldn't I have a religious exemption because my religion says it's okay? And the law would still say, sorry, that's not the case. I mean, if you're going to cohabitate with people, that's outside of our area to say anything. But if we look at legal marriage, you can't be in Canada legally married to more than one person at the same time. And so there's some of the challenges there. So if we look at, and we'll take a violent nature here on this as well. You can believe what you want, but if you try to violently force your beliefs on another, that is not okay. And so this could get into the same issue of, and like you were saying, with being in a cult, if someone's like, well, I don't want to be part of this anymore, I want to leave. And then if that person is being, forced with, the choice of, if you try to leave, like you're going to face physical harm. Or, hey, if you leave this religion, then you're like dead to us, but like literally, like we will kill you because you have left this religion. That's not okay. You can believe what you want, but if you're going to act in it in a way that violates people's safety and security, then that is not permitted. So it's one thing for a belief to exist in the mind, but for you to act on it in a way that violates the charter or violates the criminal code, it's not okay. Believe what you want. But then if someone's like, oh, that's interesting that you believe that. Well, guess what? I don't believe that. You can't be like, well, my religion says because you don't believe what I do, now I have the justification to act violently against you. That's where the courts would say, sorry, that doesn't make any sense. You can't use the justification of freedom of expression to force your particular religious views, on another person. That's a paradox. It wouldn't make any sense. What about the other two? Oh, I see someone had put for peaceful assembly, no rioting. And we'll keep this simple for the time being, but yeah, and actually this is one of the things that I think a lot of legitimate protesters are most frustrated by, is that there will be pockets of individuals that will try to use a situation um, for their own selfish gain. And often you will have people that will come forward and say, hey, we want to stand up against a government decision, and we want to make our voices heard. And then unfortunately, the bane of that protest can sometimes be people that say, haha, we will use this as a distraction, as an opportunity to now, go looting and destroy property and, create all sorts of problems. And so it then becomes not always a political issue, but how do you navigate between people who are protesting and people who are rioting? Where do you draw the line? That can sometimes even be a challenge. But for the sake of our time here, you can say that you don't like what the government is doing, but that doesn't mean that you can then do it in a violent way and be like, I don't like what the government is doing, so now I'm going to burn the city down. Well, that's not okay. What about association? And I'll actually give you a hint. We could look at association. We could look at the world of, it's not always, religious, but specifically religious extremism. Let's use that as an example. You can be part of a group that you like, but where might we draw the line and say, sorry, not okay?
Like a cult or something. I don't know.
Can we think of, unfortunately, it hasn't been in the news all that much, but it was in the news a lot several years ago. And in fact, if we looked at the civil war in Syria, and there was a group that was trying to basically create their own paradise where, it was going to be this radical extremist interpretation of, Sharia law. Anybody remember that? It was all in the news all over the place a few years ago.
You can't be a part of a terrorist organization like ISIS. Like, even if you don't do anything, just like kind of being a part of it is not allowed in a sense. If it's labeled as one.
Yeah, and so where we draw the line here with freedom of association, you can be a part of a club, you can be a member of something, even if it is a controversial group, right? There are groups that exist that if you actually look at their, this is what we believe as a group, you might look at it and be like, really? Like, that's deplorable. I can't believe that this group exists. But the reality is the government can't really step in and tell you who you can, associate with until where we really start to draw the line. If your organization exists solely for the purpose of tearing down society, government needs to, if I could type, needs to step in order to maintain order. And we're going to, again, if we have the time today, we might look at it a little bit in tomorrow's class. We're going to look at it was called the October Crisis. Again, it feels like ancient history for us. It happened before I was born. It was October 1970. So we're now approaching, oh, wow, that was over 50 years ago. And there actually, I think last year was a special report that came out, 50 years later after the October Crisis. And it was, you may have remember talking about it in grade 10 history. Although sometimes you find that when you look at grade 10 history, I know because I've taught it before, you spend a lot of time on World War I and World War II. And then by the time you get to like the 1960s, you're like, oh, okay, the Avro aerial. And then we got a flag. And then kind of we often don't get to the 70s, 80s because we run out of time. That may have been the case for you. But we are going to be looking at the October Crisis because it looked at this very issue, right? There was a group out there called the FLQ. the Front de Liberation de Quebec. And on the one hand, people were arguing, well, you know, you have the right to be part of a political organization. When, however, this political organization began to resort to kidnapping, blackmail, starting to, you know, set off, you know, bombs, etc., the government made the controversial decision to invoke something called the War Measures Act. But the argument was, okay, you can believe what you want, you can have controversial views, you can be part of an organization of like-minded individuals. But when your actions start to be, I am now going to cause terror and disruption to the society in order for me to get my way by force, by fear, that's where we step in and say, no, that is not okay. That is not a charter justified use of your rights. And by the way, I should also say that part of the reason why we now have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is in the aftermath of that October crisis and the War Measures Act. There were a lot of legal challenges to it, saying we need to think about this better. We need to have better documentation for clarity to say what the government can do and what they can't. So this has been a recap again of the Reasonable Limits Clause and your Section 2 Charter rights. I will say right here and now in the recording, on your unit test, you will get a question that asks you to identify your Section 2 Charter rights. 1, 2, 3, 4. You will also be getting, I think the final question on your unit test is, I will quote the Reasonable Limits Clause. And I will say, what is this? What does it mean? How does it work? And we've been talking about that, you know, in this period of time. We've been saying, well, it's a section of the charter that clearly outlines that everybody has rights, but also makes it clear that since everybody has rights, if you try to step on the rights of other people, you now open the door for the government to step in and say, sorry, that's too far. And we do that in order to preserve the society that we have. Because if it was just everybody doing whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, that's not a stable society. That becomes anarchy. And we do need to make sure that we maintain social order. But at the same time, we also don't want to give the government too much free rein to just, you know, boss us around and tell us that, you know, you don't have a say, just obey, obey, obey. That's why we have the courts, so that there can be challenges to government decrees and orders, etc. So, okay, I'm going to pause the recording.